Democratic Caucus meeting this morning where we had some experts tell us a little bit more about the accomplishments of the Affordable Care Act and the difficulties that would occur if some of the legislation that our Republican colleagues in the House are proposing to dismantle all or part of it, what the impact would be on Americans who are trying to gain health security. And so as we talk about that, we think it's important to step back for a moment, because one of the things that we've learned is that through all the noise, something is happening. Some 10 million or more Americans today can talk about actually taking their child to a doctor or the hospital and not worrying about going bankrupt as a result of the bill they'll get in the mail. Some 4 million Americans are now getting private health insurance through these exchanges, through these marketplaces that have made it possible for them to afford health care, in many cases for the first time in their life. There are some 3 million young Americans under the age of 26 who are getting to take advantage of health insurance coverage through their parents' insurance policy, which would not have been possible but for the Affordable Care Act. And we know that there are somewhere between 3 to 7 million people, it's uncertain exactly how many, but 3.5 million people for sure, who are receiving health care coverage as a result of qualifying for Medicaid coverage throughout the United States of America. So millions of Americans, over 10 million Americans to date, can say thanks to the Affordable Care Act. Those are 10 million good reasons why we should continue to work to make the Affordable Care Act work, and in fact, make it work better. Now, at the same time, this week we're going to take a vote for the 50th time to repeal or dismantle the Affordable Care Act. And for many of us, as you can see from this chart, it boggles the imagination. This obsession that our House Republican colleagues have with repealing or undermining the Affordable Care Act goes beyond just a waste of time. It actually is harming the country. It costs money to put a bill on the floor of the House. It costs money to have all the people who work in the Congress pull together the legislation, to make time on the floor, to pay the bills, to light the chamber, to get this done. 50 times now we will have voted to dismantle or repeal the Affordable Care Act. At the same time, in what is becoming the biggest do-nothing Congress in the history of our country, we have taken not one single vote on raising the minimum wage. We have taken not one single vote to renew the unemployment insurance for now some 2 million Americans who are out of work through no fault of their own. We have taken not one single vote to guarantee equal pay for equal work for so many working Americans who happen to be women who are getting paid less than their male counterparts. And we have taken not one single vote to do what the vast majority of Americans say it's time to do, and that is to fix our broken immigration system. The Senate has already accomplished its task on a bipartisan basis, but yet the House has refused under Republican leadership to allow there to be a vote in this chamber to fix a broken immigration system. And the latest news on the minimum wage, there is a petition underway in this House of Representatives to give members a chance to have a vote. Not to force a vote, yes, but just to have a vote and let the chips fall where they may. That petition that we have filed, many of us have filed, now has 192 signatures. And in the House of Representatives with 218 votes, you can pass a bill to send it to the President. Now, if you take the 192 Democrats who have voted for, or excuse me, who have signed on to this petition to discharge the stuck legislation to increase the minimum wage, and add to that the 36 Republicans who are in the House of Representatives today who in the past have voted for a minimum wage increase, you get a magical number. You get 228. That's 10 more votes than you would need to pass the minimum wage bill in the House of Representatives. So what's the problem? What's the holdup? Why are we not getting our work done and helping millions of Americans get a raise? and no longer have to live in poverty even though they work very hard. We're here to say it's time to get to work. We don't want to continue to see this kind of a scoreboard where 50 times our Republican colleagues tried to dismantle or repeal health security for so many millions of Americans. At the same time, they do nothing, zero, 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 on things like the minimum wage, dealing with unemployment insurance, trying to make sure there's equal pay for equal work, fixing the broken immigration system. It's time for us to get to work. Otherwise, our Republican colleagues will leave a legacy of having presided over the biggest do-nothing Congress that we've seen in our history. With that, let me yield to my colleague, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It may sound repetitive. I hope not to. You know, the 50th anniversary is typically the golden anniversary. Your 50th birthday, your 50th wedding anniversary. In fact, when John Dingell celebrated 50 years in service to the House of Representatives, it was a big deal. We made a big celebration about it. And we have this new milestone, 50 times trying to pass a bill that's going absolutely nowhere. I don't know how many times the Republican caucus believes they have to pass a bill before we get the fact that they don't like the Affordable Care Act. We get it. We understand the Republican majority in the House of Representatives does not like the Affordable Care Act. I think we get that, Javier. Am I wrong?
I think it's sunk in. Yeah.
I think it's sunk in. We got it the first time they did it. We got it the second time. We got it the 10th time, the 20th time, the 30th time, 40th, and now the 50th time. We understand the Republicans don't like the Affordable Care Act and all that it has achieved to bring health security, and will achieve to bring health security to millions and millions of Americans. As my chairman just mentioned, 50 times to repeal a bill, but not one vote, not a single vote, not 50 votes, not one vote to extend unemployment insurance. Not one vote to raise the minimum wage. Not 50 votes, not even one vote. Not one vote for pay equity to ensure that women in the United States earn equal pay for equal work. Not a single vote. And not a single vote, not one vote, but 50 votes to rescind, to take away something from the American people, but not one vote for comprehensive immigration reform. There's something wrong with that. Maybe they think the American people don't get it. Maybe they think the American people are dumb. The Republican caucus obviously doesn't have the faith in the American people to understand when they want to repeal something once that they, the Republican caucus, don't like the Affordable Care Act. We get it, the American people get it, and the American people won't forget the Republican caucus, not once, but 50 times. And as Mr. Boehner has said, he will continue to schedule votes to undo, to unwind, to do away with the Affordable Care Act for as long as he's the Speaker of the House. That needs to change. That agenda needs to change. The American people will remember this agenda in November.
We'll take questions.
I want to ask about Ukraine. Yesterday, Steny Hoyer said that he would support tougher sanctions if it came to that, if Russia did not pull out, de-escalate in their Crimea. Wondering what the sense of the caucus is on that issue, if that's something you support, or if there's a real risk there of escalating sanctions with Russia, which are already kind of at a high point.
I know that from talking to members that there is a heightened concern at some of the statements being made by Russia, its leaders. There is heightened concern with the activities being undertaken by the Russians in the Ukraine, or Ukraine. I don't know if I tell you that members feel like there is a particular solution that works best. I can tell you this. Personally, it scares me when I hear some politicians talk about how we could just resolve this in Ukraine ourselves, or that we should be acting much faster to take care of the Russian issue in Ukraine or take out the Russians in Ukraine. It reminds me too much of Iraq. And I believe that we owe it to our men and women in uniform to act very carefully, decisively, intelligently, and in the best interest of our people, but carefully, because we saw the consequence of going into a war in a rushed, unprepared, and now we know less than frank position and reason to go in. And so I can say that with regard to Ukraine, I think most Americans and most members of Congress would say we want to stand with the Ukrainian people, let them live out the opportunity to have democracy and freedom. At the same time, we want to make sure that we respect the American people and our men and women in uniform, so that whatever we do it in the best interests of our country and those young men and women who've been serving for quite some time in Iraq or Afghanistan and other theaters. And we have to respect that we have to do this the smart way, not the rushed way. Joe?
I would just say I think our caucus is still learning about the situation in Ukraine, and we're paying attention very closely to what Secretary Kerry has been engaged in, as has been the President. I'm very grateful for the efforts that Secretary Kerry has made traveling to Kiev and witnessing himself what's happening on the ground there. I do think what we're looking for is measured response to what has taken place so far. I do think that the sovereignty, and this is Joe Crowley speaking, not necessarily on behalf of the overall caucus, that the sovereignty of Ukraine is something that has been recognized internationally, as well as by the Russian Federation as well, both international agreements as well as bilateral agreements between the Ukraine, by Ukraine and the Russia. So it is something we're watching very closely. I know that the President has asked for a $1 billion loan guarantee to Ukraine. I think that generally is being supportive by our caucus. So again, we haven't taken a formal vote on that, but I think generally speaking, the caucus is supportive of the movement the President has taken so far. And I think measured response for what is happening over there.
More specifically, would you support, focusing on any military issue, would you support, like, for example, targeted economic sanctions against Russian officials who were responsible for China that's being discussed by more leaders?
Well, I would just say that we'll take them as they come, and we'll examine them and make a determination at that point. It's what you're talking of right now is hypothetical. I do think that the hypothetical is wearing a bit on the Russian oligarchs, as well as business people within Russia themselves that see a potential for a much deeper involvement economically in terms of what the United States will do and the world will do. This is not just the United States problem. This is certainly an issue for all nations that respect the territorial boundaries of each other, as well as in particular, I think, Europe and Asia, where Ukraine finds herself on the border of both.
I'd only add that we are the greatest nation on earth. We are the most powerful military on earth. That doesn't mean that we should always have to be the only ones that step up to the plate. And so I think we're going to be watching very closely, as the Vice Chairman just said, to make sure that those who are neighbors to Ukraine, those for whom that region of the world is very close, that they step up. We need to make sure that when it's on that side of the globe, that we know we have allies and friends and partners who are working to step up, because, as I said, our men and women in uniform have done a whole lot, and I know they're prepared to do more. And I believe those of us in Congress are prepared to do the right thing as well, whatever that might be. We would be ready for any option. But let's make sure it's a smart option, and let's make sure we do it having first seen what those who are nearest and closest to that have done to step up to the plate as well.
On the minimum wage, Republicans have said there's no reason for them to bring up anything in the House for the Senate Act. I mean, have you heard anything from Senate Democrats about the prospect for them actually moving something?
You know, it's interesting. When we're getting ready for this 50th vote to repeal or dismantle the health security law, the House Republicans never said they had to wait to find out what the Senate would do. to move on that. Even though 49 times they've failed, they continue to do this. They're not waiting for the Senate. At the same time, we know that there are 36 Republicans in the House of Representatives, 36 of our colleagues, who have supported the increase in the minimum wage in the past. And so it's not a matter of waiting for someone to do something. It's a matter about doing your fulfilling your responsibility when you ran for office to get things done. There is no reason for us to wait. The American public supports Congress voting to increase the minimum wage. Certainly all those hardworking Americans who have families who are working at that $7.25 an hour wage are anxious to see us act. And so I would simply say, if you have to sit and wait for someone to do your job, then maybe you should consider different employment. It's time for us to step up to the plate and do what America expects. Build an economy that works for all Americans. And part of that is making sure that if you work in America, you won't live in poverty. And so let's start to, once again, respect work. Let's honor people who do a full day's work every day and let them know that we don't expect them to live in poverty, as I keep saying, to have to drive on the way home from work to the food pantry to pick up food so that they'll have enough food that evening to feed the family, even though they've worked a full day's work.
I can't help but say this, but the Senate passed an immigration bill. Does your logic follow then, carry to that issue? They've already passed one, so maybe that means that they're willing to take up an immigration bill. Still waiting.
But Joe, representatives,
you know, maybe if they would indicate to their own senators that we're waiting over here for the Senate to pass a UI extension, so we get a couple more Republican senators to support Democrats and pass, finally get a 60-vote margin to pass a UI insurance. Are we waiting here for it? Is the Republicans waiting for a UI bill to be passed in the Senate? You know, so I think you have to really look at the history here. If we didn't have the history, maybe what your question would be logical or would be have some resonance here. But at the same time, we know the history. Simply because the Senate passes or does anything absolutely means nothing in terms of whether or not we'll take it up here in the House if there's no deadline.
Great point. Any other questions?
I get a question into the IRS hearing, which is come and gone. Former Chief Learner took the fifth, and Chairman Issa shut the microphone off on your colleague, Mr. Cummings. How do you see this playing out? Mr. Cummings is quite provoked, you might expect. Mr. Issa,
Republican democracy in action. What has happened to regular order? What has happened to both sides being able to weigh in? Mr. Issa, I understand, had the opportunity to make an opening statement as the Republican chair of the committee. He did not offer that same respect, that collegial respect to the ranking member, Mr. Cummings. That, I think, further demonstrates the breakdown in the camaraderie or what is wrong with Washington and the Congress today. And again, we're in the minority. We are subject to what the majority allows to take place because they chair the committee. If the chairman shuts the microphone off, what can you do at that point? I do think there are vehicles by which we can express ourselves. We're doing it now. I think that Mr. Cummings Congressman Cummings will also have an opportunity to express his thoughts as in terms of this false investigation, which the chairman and I have been a part of in the Ways and Means Committee. There's no there. There's no smoking gun except for a cap gun, and makes a lot of smoke, but that's about it. And the reality is, the American people, I think, are onto this as well. This is all charades in a game. If there were an issue of corruption, Mr. Issa was informed of it prior to the 2012 elections of this investigation. And if Mr. Issa, the investigative king of America, didn't choose to investigate it back then when the president was on the hook for an election, but all of a sudden now they find it, it doesn't smell right. I think the American people get it, and this is a further demonstration of that as well. It's all about gimmickry, a circus, and not about finding the truth.
Actually, I'll just, this shutdown politics has to end. This notion that you can just shut down government for 17 days and impact the lives of millions of Americans, over 800,000 Americans who couldn't go to work back in October because our Republican colleagues decided to shut down the government to try to make their point about, once again, repealing or dismantling the Affordable Care Act, having nothing to do with the federal budget, which had to shut down, or the federal government, which had to shut down because we couldn't get a federal budget through when Republicans decided to hold court on the Affordable Care Act. It's the same thing. For a chairman to shut down a hearing, for a chairman to shut down the microphone during regular order on a colleague, this politics of shut down government has to stop because it does no one any good, and it certainly doesn't help build an economy that's going to work for all Americans. And so it's time for us to get to work, do the things that matter to most people, stop the game playing, and treat this chamber as what it is, the people's house, not a sandlot for kids. Anything else?
When do you expect a decision on the
Immigration bill. We are in the process of meeting with a lot of different people, both those who are interested in immigration reform, those who are personally impacted by a broken immigration system, chatting with our colleagues. Our leader today posed that question to a number of our colleagues about what we can try to do to keep the effort going to pass immigration reform in this do-nothing Congress. And so we are looking at all options to try to make sure that we get one thing, and only one thing, a chance to vote. That's all we're asking. Give us a vote. Give us a vote on an immigration reform proposal. We're not asking Republicans to vote yes. We're simply saying just give us a chance to vote, to do what the American people say they want us to do. Same on the minimum wage. Give us a vote. You don't have to vote for it. Just give us a vote. Equal pay for equal work. Give us a vote. Unemployment insurance for Americans who've lost their job through no fault of their own. Give us a vote. And let the chips fall where they may. But we believe that if the American people are given a vote by the Republican leadership in the House, we'll actually get things done.
I would just follow up by saying I think the Democratic minority in the House of Representatives will use every legislative procedure we can to get a vote on immigration reform, and that includes an immigration discharge petition. We'll use every procedure we possibly can, as the chairman said, to finally get a vote in this Congress on immigration reform.